This synthetic material. It's made for fly tying, and I'm just using it as an underbody with a thin veil of marabou over the top. Alright, well, I hope you like it. Favorite flies to jig heads. A few years ago I injured my rotor cuff, so I was trying to figure out how I could get around having to use a fly rod, which was just too painful. So I was trying to think, oh, how can I get around the issues that I was having with my shoulder and trying to fly cast. And so I came up with the idea, well, I'm just going to start tying some of my favorite flies to jig heads, and so that I can cast them on a spinning rod. So this is a version of an emerald pattern, emerald shiner pattern that I came up with. And yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. There's all kinds of flies that are tied to imitate the emerald shiner, and I'm sure there's probably some jigs out there as well, but this is just how I do it. And so let's get started on that. I went ahead and picked out a few of the feathers that I'm going to use. Well, first of all, this is a 3/0, just a gray Dacron thread for fly tying, and I've got it put on an 1/8 ounce jig here. That seems to be about the appropriate size and hook length and hook gape for the kind of fishing that I'm going to be doing, which is mostly smallmouth, but some steelhead fishing. Yeah, so for, you know, smaller fish. And then the emerald shiner, I looked up the life history, and they spawn in the spring, so that's when you're going to see the adult size, you know, the spawners. So we'll see mostly adults, or the fish will be keyed in on the adult size, which is about 3 inches. I guess they can grow to be 3.5. I've seen them anywhere from 2.5 to 3, so we're going for 3. So this 1/8 ounce jig head is a good size hook for that size fly. And I picked out some booger marabou. This is usually used for woolly buggers, for tails. It's not a real long feather, so I'm gonna have to go in here, and I've already kind of gauged it and figured out that I'm gonna use this tan feather. First is what I'm going to lay down as a tail, and so I want to get rid of some of this fluff, the real fluffy hairs, and yeah, so we'll get those off to the side. I'm going to leave this on the stem. This is a typical method for doing the fly called a woolly bugger, or a booger, and I'm using my vise as a gauge. I know that this is 3 inches from the head of this jig head to right here on this vise is 3 inches. So I think it's really probably from experience, in order to get consistent flies, you have to kind of come up with a recipe and have some way to gauge it or measure it, whether it's a little ruler or yeah, something to gauge the length of what I want. And then I also want this to be about 2 times the length of the hook, about one time the length of the hook, and that'll give me my 3 inches, and the tail will be long enough to get the right kind of movement that I want to try to get out of it in the water. And I've tied these with different materials. Bucktail, you can use craft fur, yeah, whatever you got that will imitate a tail of a fish, bait fish. In this case we're using marabou. So we got a thread base laid down. I got that tail put on the back, tied over the top of the hook mostly. Try to get the stem over the top of the hook shank, or in this case the bottom of the hook shank. I'll trim that off. And I'm just winding the thread right to where the lead starts. It's where most of the materials are going to end for this part of the fly. And then I already pinched off some of this crystal flash and put it in my hackle pliers here. But this is just micro crystal flash in blue. So it's got some blue and some green. And yeah, I want to get enough so that I can cover both sides. And I try to get close to the length that I want to get before I tie it on. And this can be just tied on the side of the hook. Do one wrap and then pull it and position it and just get them cinched together. I want them to kind of operate as like one strand. For the barring effect. And get like 2 or 3 turns. And get it cinched on there good. Then I pull it back on the back side, and then do a few loose wraps to get it in place. And I see that I've gotten it, and I'm just going to hold it and cinch that down. A couple of turns and a little bit of a pull. It's 3/0 thread, so it's pretty heavy. I'm going to go to this ice dubbing here, a selection, different colors, and I'm going to go with this emerald green, a little bit of an olivey emerald green, and I'm going to pull out about as much as I think it's going to take. And I've tied this fly probably, I don't know, 100 times, so I've kind of come up with a recipe knowing about how much material to use. But it's always good to have an example of the fly, of one that you tied that you like the way that it looks in the water, because you'll be more likely to fish it if all of your flies kind of look the way that you want them to when you go into your box. Yeah, you're gonna pick out the one that looks the best. So it's always good to have one that you can line up to the one that you're tying, and just try to copy that. Once you come up with a recipe and a size and the length of the different lengths of the feathers and where you're going to gauge, how you're going to gauge it, and all that kind of thing, the colors you're going to use. But in this case, we're going with this, and then I like to get one wrap started with this dub that I've just twisted onto the thread. I can get one wrap around, then I have something to leverage against, spin that fiber on the thread, and then wrap up to cover that shank and give it some flash, some color. There are versions of these flies that don't have really any kind of underbody, because you'll see in the end a lot of it gets covered up. But I'm trying to cover it sparse enough, or tie it in sparse enough, so that this stuff will show through in the end. So we'll see how it comes out. But I want to try to lightly veil anything that I put as an underbody so that it does show through. And that may take some practice. You may have to tie a couple or undo it, back up, start over. Yeah, it's a learning curve and a process that, from looking at the actual bait fish, sometimes I even go on like Google and just Google images of a particular bait fish, look up the life history as far as, how long do they get, when are they most active as far as spawning or whatever goes. In this case, I know that there's emerald shiners in the rivers and streams where I fish in the springtime, so I like to have quite a few of these on hand. Do more fishing and less tying during the season. So, all right, so I feel like that's enough of an underbody. So we've got our Flashaboo, or our crystal flash, I should say. I'm going to trim that as well, just to get it out of the way. And for now, I'm going to go a little long. So I'm cutting it about 1/2 inch past the tail, but I'll probably bring it in just a little closer than that. Get our tan tail marabou, our ice dub, and emerald green up to the back of the head on this lead jig. So from there, I've got this this EP fiber, which is like a clear material, synthetic material, with some Flashaboo in it, some micro Flashaboo mixed in with it. I lost the packaging label, so I can't tell you exactly the name of it. But I already know too that I want to use this as an underbody just to kind of fill it out and give it some texture and some translucency if we do it right. So I go with the width of my pinky nail, about the width of my pinky nail. I know that this fly is really no deeper or thicker than that. So, and then I like to go about, I don't want to go too far into the tail at all, because I don't want this to interfere with the movement, but I do want it to transition into the tail. So I'm going in probably about 1/4 inch, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. So we'll get that started on there. We've got a loose wrap. And then this stuff too, I do like to cut this off and then just lay another piece on the other side, rather than doing what I did with the Flashaboo, is to just tie it on one side and bring it over, wrap it around, because this stuff adds bulk when you start bunching it up. So I've just got a couple wraps on there holding it for now. And I got in my rotary vise here, I'm going to flip it over, lock that in place, and we'll see we got enough here. Yeah, that'll come out just fine. Right about there, which is about 3/8 of an inch past the hook bend. Bring it in just a little, and loose wrap. Grab both ends of the material, bunch it together where you want it on the hook, and then that way it doesn't add too much bulk. Alright, 3 or 4 good wraps, and then give it a little tug, and trim it up a little bit here. Errant hairs. Okay, so that is the underbody. Did get pulled up a little bit, so I'm going to just tug it down, get it about in the position I want it to be. Alright, and the next step is a white. I've got a white marabou feather here, blending in. There it is, and there again, this is considered woolly bugger tail material. So it's got a shorter length of the barbules that come off of the quill, and yeah, you can put it up here. I already know that this is the right length, but when you bend it over the hook, you can see how far back that material is going to come, and I don't want it to come back quite to the tail and cover up that tail. So I'm going to actually pull a few more barbules down to get to where they're just slightly shorter than that. And I'll offer it back up there again, get an idea where they're going to fall. That looks good. So then I'm going to grab this and strip these back off of that quill a little ways so I can trim that and have the stem. And this is white marabou, so tan tail with white in the front. This is like a collar that's going to veil this material that's underneath here, and to go for like kind of a translucent effect. And I'm looking for the convex and the concave curved side of this feather. So I'm going to use that to my advantage because I want the material to lay back over the body. And take the quill or the stem of that and tie that in on this side facing me. And I just want to get it on there. And sometimes they will roll. If you give it a little bit of a tug, it may pinch that. Ultimately, I'm just going to get it to what I want it to do, which is to flip over. You can also nibble on the stem a little bit if you're having a hard time with that. Like this kind of flipped over on me a little bit, but I'm just gonna overpower that. Twist it down. Grab the side feathers. I'm gonna try to find the stem. Okay. All right. So on having a hard time grabbing this feather, so I'm gonna grab it with the hackle pliers here. Find that stem, and I want to try to flip it the way that I want it to go. Just like that, right there. There's a single wrap. Sometimes wetting your fingers and pulling this stuff back and getting that out of the way is a good idea. And also trying to get any trapped fibers out. So we're going for wrap number 2. Okay, this we're going to let go with the pliers and just hold it there. I'm going to get these last little bits. And this is going for wrap number 3. And then you can take a needle or your bodkin or even a toothbrush. In this case, I'm just using the point of these scissors. Pull these fibers out. Anything that's trapped in there, out. And pin that with a wrap. Wet my fingers. Stroke the stuff back. I'll get that out of the way. Feather in position, the top part of that, and I'm going to give it 1, 2, 3. Give it a little tug, and 4. That's plenty. I'll trim that off. Tip of that feather, and whatever else might be errant. Get that out of the way. Okay, so that is the marabou over top of that underbody. Gives it a translucent effect, especially in the water. And the part that comes with practice is how much material. And like I said, there's a couple of different ways to do that. One is to gauge your length of the feathers that you want, your overall length, but then, you know, proportion of compared to the hook shank, how long of a tail you want. In this case, because I want to be able to see through this marabou and see that underbody, see those colors, yeah, I want for 3 wraps. And every feather is going to be different. It depends on the quality of the feather, the length of the feather, yeah, how many wraps you do. And that all comes with experience and figuring out what is going to work for you or the effect that you're trying to get. So once you come up with one that you can use as an example, it's a good idea to tie a few looking at that, and then after fishing it and using it, you'll see what works and what is either too thick and too bulky. It's kind of difficult to wrap it too thin. It seems like most people overcompensate, or even myself when I first started tying, and used too much material, too many wraps of the thread, even building up too much bulk with the thread or too much bulk with the materials. And then the other thing is that these flies get lost. They don't last. They don't last forever. So, yeah, try to do a quick and easy process. This is just like maybe five steps or 5 different types of material. You could go more elaborate and try to make it more realistic. I like to go kind of minimalist and go for suggestive look to the fly. And then that way too, I'm not spending hours and hours trying to tie one of these and then go and right away cast it into a tree, or it gets stuck on a stick in the bottom, or snapped off by a fish. And then I'm going to add, I picked out this feather here because I had long enough barbules to add a dorsal side to this. And I'm doing this actually in front of my fish tank for 2 reasons, because we're going to tank test it, but also to look at these fish and how they're swimming around and moving. And yeah, these are not emerald shiners. They're actually Denios, but these little silver guys here. But they have like a tan silver, yeah, above the silver, they have kind of a tan or olive top. And most fish do. It's like camouflage from predators above. That they have that darker dorsal side. So I'm going to add a little bit of this material over the top just to give it a little bit of a dorsal camo, like the naturals. And then there again, this is emerald shiner, and they have an olive top to them. I'm going to cut that out of there. Actually, that's too much. Pull that off. And yeah, add this to the top. I wet it first so that I can control it a little bit better. Now the other thing is this is exactly upside down, because this would be the belly of how the fish rides in the water. So we want to have this on top. And with jig heads, this is a little bit of a challenge. But I also removed that from the side of the stem. You know, you can on some flies, especially if it's an upright hook. And this is the advantage to using a jig head, I feel like, too. Not only can you cast it on a spinning rod, but if you can get that hook to ride up, it's less likely to catch stuff on the bottom, of course. So it does present a little bit of a challenge getting this material in there, because it's hard to get around that vise. But if you get it centered where the tie-in is, because a lot of times you can take with the stem in it. This has got a stem up the middle. But if you put that stem over the top, kind of like I did on the tail here, it doesn't matter because it's not hitting anything. But if you put that stem or the quill over the top with the feathers on it, you're going to be fighting that hook, because it's going to want to ride, the stem's going to want to ride on one side or the other of the hook. And so I stripped that off of that quill so that I can divide it either side of the hook. Anyway, and get that on there. And just want to give it a loose wrap, get it on the top, and then second wrap a little bit tighter, that way it won't spin. If you go light with your wraps at first, then you can tie them up with subsequent, or tighten them up with subsequent turns. So there's 4 turns, and come in here, and before I bring that thread up to the back of the head, get rid of as much of this as possible. Okay, once that's trimmed, And I like to take a little bit more of this ice dub, and I'm going to stick with the emerald green olive here, and that's just going to be on the collar. Give a twist of that just to kind of cover that up a little bit, make it blend in with the rest of the fly. Give it a little bit more color, flash, and that's just about right. So then in front of that, I'm going to give it just one wrap, cinch it, pull it tight, and then I'm going to use my whip finisher tool here and finish it up. And I like to do 4 to 5 turns with a whip finisher. So here, let me lock my vise in place here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then take up any slack that they got wrapped underneath, because that tool wraps the knot is actually underneath the wraps. Subsequent wraps that go over top, the thread gets pulled underneath by this tool, and so there is some slack that you got to pull out, I find. And for this fly, this particular pattern, I don't like to use head cement or lacquer or any kind of glue, so I'm going to give it a second knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll go 5 on this one. And then that's not going to come out. I've never had a doubled up knot come out. And in theory, if it does somehow, a fish tooth hits it, or it gets pulled out, which it won't, but if it does somehow come untied, it's got a backup knot behind it. So that should be good. All right. We'll talk about the proportions a little bit, because this is the hardest part to get with fly tying. And it is good to think of it in terms of overall length, the length of your tail, the length of your skirt or whatever you're putting on for a collar or a head or a skirt. In this case, it's marabou, and most of it is coming back about 2/3 or 3/4 into that tail, which is what I want to see. And I've got a little bit of marabou over the top, and that doesn't seem to be impeded by the hook as it's been stripped off the quill. And yeah, we'll do a little tank test and see what it looks like here. Hey fishies, I made you a little friend. Look at your little friend. All right, before we tank test it, I'm just going to comb it back. Look at the overall scheme of things here. And I do like to have the crystal flash sticking out a little bit beyond the tail, but just a little bit. And kind of cut that like that. Kind of looks like a lateral line or a little flash in the tail. And I made this little fishing rod setup for the tank here. And sometimes I will put, especially if it's smaller than this, I'll put a little piece of cork or foam on the hook, so in case it does touch a fish here, I'm not going to hook it. But here we go. We'll give this a try. See what looks best here. Alright, so here's the tank test. See what it looks like. It takes a minute for the materials to get wet. But once they get wet, they really look good. That marabou is a great material for making jigs out of. I've made them with bucktail and with craft fur and feathers. You can take 2 concave feathers and match them up and tie them together. That's kind of like more the traditional way. But yeah, mixing some of this synthetic material It's made for fly tying, and I'm just using it as an underbody with a thin veil of marabou over the top. Alright, well, I hope you like it. Like, share, and subscribe. This is the first in a series of putting favorite flies to jig hooks.